Hi, everybody. This is Jennifer Kincheloe, author of The Secret Life of Anna Blanc and the Woman in the Camphor Trunk. And I put together a slideshow for you all of images that inspired the books and informed my research of the early 1900s in Los Angeles. So I hope you enjoy it. Anna Blanc Mystery Series is about Anna Blanc, a socialite in 1900s Los Angeles who's gotten a job as a police matron with the LAPD, and she has an insatiable desire to solve crimes. Fashion is a huge thing for Anna and for other wealthy women of her period, and one of the things that features prominently in their wardrobe are hats. Some hats for you to see. They were flamboyant and dramatic and heavy, often very strange. Their hairstyles, they wore their hair up, but they had very long hair, and a lot of their hairstyles were really just designed to support those big hats. Here you have a pompadour hairstyle. The fashion was very beautiful, sort of based on the foundation of a corset, which maybe didn't feel so beautiful. But here's some of the kinds of clothes that Anna would have worn. The women who were wealthy really flaunted their wealth. It was a time of opulence. And so jewelry and clothes, they spent money on them. A modest outfit, something a police matron might have worn. Here's a pair of drawers. They're two-piece, split up the middle. These are something Anna would have worn for sure. Here's a bust enhancer. A corset. And all ages of women wore corsets. They started girls pretty young. Pregnant women wore corsets. Older women wore corsets. Stockings were a luxury, and some of them were quite wonderful. This one has a snake wrapped around the ankles because these days you might get a glimpse of a woman's ankle. I love this advertisement for men's underwear because it's his underwear are so sheer, and I can't imagine them having a picture of a woman in an advertisement like this. They had their own standards of beauty, of course. Here's Evelyn Nesbit. She was kind of a supermodel of the era. Actor Lily Elsie, also one of the most photographed women of the time and very beautiful. And here you have the Gibson girl. She was an illustrated ideal of female beauty. And notice all these women are brunette. Here's the Arrow Collar Man. He was also an illustrated person, but so popular with the women of America, he received fan mail. Pictures relied on them when researching this book for details and learning about things like what was their transportation like? How did you get on a trolley? Of course, they had bicycles and automobiles, and here we have a woman riding side saddle. A lot of people have told me, oh, women back then, they didn't do these things. They didn't think these things. They were very demure. They were very obedient. And I know better, having done a little historical research, that women really haven't changed. So pictures really help me see what the women were up to back then. Here we have a woman who is a principal of an interracial school, a mixed race school in Hawaii. And were being arrested for protesting for the right to vote. There were women bodybuilders. This woman was a professional baseball player on a men's team. Women traveled. Hiking was a big activity back in the 1900s. It was considered the golden age of hiking. Here we have an intrepid stunt rider, a couple of boxers, and a fisherwoman. Sometimes we forget that our ancestors were fundamentally human and very much like us. Basketball was very popular with girls. Some women were off getting into trouble. This is a mugshot. Fighting for the right to vote. Women were shamed for fighting for suffrage. Here's a postcard suggesting that women were using their bodies to get men to let them vote. Photograph from 1906 of a Dr. Lotson of New York. She taught jujitsu and a mode of self-defense that she developed that employed the use of umbrellas. And she really did teach this to suffragists so that they could protect themselves against cops. The idea of women in law enforcement was a very new idea. And here you have a suffragist demonstrating how women can be cops. Here's Annette Kellerman. She was a professional swimmer and a businesswoman. She was one of the first to wear a one-piece swimsuit for when she went to jail for that. And she was also the first to appear nude in a Hollywood film. Here's some girls just walking down the street, and I love the fact that street photography sort of became a thing during the 1900s, and we have some wonderful pictures of women just and in their natural setting. Here's a mason. This is the great Kate Sanduina, a strong woman, and interestingly enough, she was named after Eugene Sandow, who was a strong man, so they called her Sanduina, and she actually beat him in a competition. That's what the women were up to. What were the men up to? I have no idea who this guy is, or this guy. Big mustaches were a thing. This is Stanford White, Evelyn Nesbit's lover, who was famously shot and killed by her husband, Mr. Thaw. I was very interested in learning about their attitudes towards romance, their courting rituals, because, of course, both my books, The Secret Life of Anna Blanc and The Woman in the Camphor Trunk, have strong romantic subplots. One of the things I learned is that in my research, because I did a lot of book research as well, reading a lot in the newspapers especially, but a lot of primary sources, eyewitness accounts, but also academic works. But one of the things I learned is that during this time period, about almost a quarter of births were conceived out of wedlock. And that was very surprising to me. Women were unchaperoned as they went into the workforce, so there was more opportunity. College women were away from home. They were notorious. They had terrible reputations. College woman was sort of synonymous with easy girl. But at the same time, a lot of women still did not know the birds and the bees when they got married. I read some books that were advice books for young women, single women, and married women. And even the advice book for married women really skirted around the topic of sex. And it did say that a lot of women just did not know what was going to happen to them on their wedding night. And here's Eugene Sandow, who I mentioned before, the father of bodybuilding. I forgot he was in here. But I was very much interested in their standards of beauty and what they thought was sexy. Don't be shocked. We still have the whole reluctant woman thing. Here we have a picture by Harrison Fisher, a woman with a distinctly come hither look. I'm sure Anna Blanc would use this on Joe Singer. Photography was sort of getting going. Here we have The Apparition by Constant Puyo from 1910. The Bubble by Clarence White. And Imogen Cummingham's The Dream from 1910. I'm not sure who this is, but I think it's interesting. The work by Raphael Kirchner. He was kind of a scandalous artist of the day. This artwork is also unattributed, but I think it's fun. Alphonse Mucha. When I saw this, I was so surprised because it looks so contemporary almost, and I just thought it was very interesting. Film was just getting going. Here's a still from A Trip to the Moon by Georges Méliès. Both the books in the Anna Blanc mystery series are humorous, and I was very curious to explore what the different generations thought was funny. So here's an example of 1900s humor. A humorous postcard. The Merry Widow hat was coming into fashion around 1908, and of course, it is fundamentally humorous. More hats. Another funny postcard. And you gotta love these jokers here. From the movie theater. I was also very interested in their attitudes towards drugs and alcohol because anytime you have cops, you're going to run into drunks and dope fiends, as they would have called them. Here's a still from a movie that's sort of dramatizing a opium den. This kind of goes along with the hysteria about how Chinese men will prey on white women, weak-willed white women. This isn't a real scene. There were opium dens in Chinatown. There was only one that allowed whites. The whites had their own opium dens, also supplied by the Chinese gangs. I'm not sure what this lady's smoking. Absinthe was a thing. Here's another opium den shot. This is also by Raphael Kushner, and it is a picture of his wife, who was a dope fiend in the lingo of the time. Harry Houdini was entertaining people back in the day. I was very curious to see what they did for entertainment. This woman had a show with trained birds. She was quite famous. There was vaudeville and ventriloquists. I was also very interested in how they treated their animals. Here's a posed photograph by Henry Whittier Fries. Tea party. I was interested in their spirituality. Here is Arthur Conan Doyle, author of the Sherlock Holmes series. He was a outspoken spiritualist. Spiritualism was a big thing back in the day, and you can see he's got this is a double exposure. It's an example of spirit photography. So there's this ghost hovering over him. I explored their science. Here's a robot. This is Mark Twain in Tesla's laboratory because they were friends. Love this picture. I was curious about the status of children. It was the progressive era, so a time of reform, a time to tackle corruption, and also a time of trying to push forward laws that would protect children's rights. Here we have a picture of the Los Angeles Police Department. Here's all the officers in the force. You can see the detectives who are in plain clothes, the patrolmen who are in uniform. And up in the front, you have two women. You've got the police matron and her assistant. So, can you imagine what it would be like to work in that work environment? Here's Central Station. It's where Anna Blanc was the central police station of the LAPD. Anna Blanc worked here. There were stables in the basement. It also features in James Ellroy's novels, LA Confidential and Black Dahlia, Perfidia, because that's where the cops operated out of. It was torn down in the 1950s. The LAPD got their first motorized car in 1904. It was a part ambulance, part patrol wagon. This picture's taken a little bit later, but it's the same vehicle. Most cops were on foot, on horseback. They had bicycles. They had a motorcycle towards the late part of the 1900s. I'm going to talk a little bit about Chinatown. The Woman in the Camphor Trunk is set in Chinatown. It's based on two true stories that I learned about from the papers. The first one was a story of a young missionary woman. She was 19. Her name was Elsie Siegel. She was the daughter of a famous Civil War general, and she was a missionary to Chinatown in New York. And in 1909, her body was found stuffed in a trunk in the apartment of her Chinese lover. And I was so intrigued by the story, it made newspapers around the world. Her lover, Leon Ling, disappeared, and it set off an international manhunt. But it also set off an enormous backlash against the Chinese. For one, Chinese men were being arrested all over the country because people thought they were Leon Ling, but they weren't. They were just unwitting, good Chinese citizens. There was a huge anger towards white women working with Chinese men as missionaries because for some reason most of the missionaries to Chinatown were women. And just a backlash against the Chinese in general, and racism just blossomed. Here's another picture of Elsie Siegel, a man who was a witness, and then her father and her sister. Here's an advertisement for rat poison, but it also sort of uses the stereotype of Chinese as rat eaters. I alluded to this before, but Chinese men have the reputation of being hypersexual and also irresistible to weak-willed white women, and they would seduce them with their opium and their sexiness. Curious to find out what the Chinese men were really like, and just like women, their Chinese men in 1900s were a lot like men today. Chinese were they grew vegetables. In Los Angeles, they were the main suppliers of produce for the city of Los Angeles. And this guy has got baskets of lilies, flowers that were used to celebrate Chinese New Year. Pictures of San Francisco's Chinatown just because it's better documented than Los Angeles's Chinatown, but you can see the kind of clothes the men would wear. Also, notice that I don't think there are any women in this picture because Chinatowns were predominantly men. In Los Angeles, it was 95% men because of discriminatory immigration policies that banned Chinese women. They were seen as degenerate. And the women that were in Chinatown were trafficked in mostly, and they were mostly used for sex. Anytime you have a community that's 95% men, it's kind of a powder keg. Chinatown was also, it was where all the vice was, all the brothels and saloons and gambling joints. They're all zoned into Chinatown. So it was the sort of debauched playground of Los Angeles, and all different races went there. The streets weren't paved. There were no sewers. The Chinatown wasn't owned by the Chinese because they weren't allowed to own property, and the landlords didn't keep it up. Wealthy Chinese really had to stay in Chinatown because there was nowhere for them else for them to go. You can see the dirty, muddy streets. Did decorate for Chinese New Year, painted their buildings bright colors, hung lanterns. Some cribs, which are really low-class brothels. The little doors go into tiny rooms where women would work as prostitutes. The Chinese-American family. The woman is the wife of a Tong leader in New York City, Mock Duck. He was with the Hip Sing Tong. But you can see she's got Western. Might have been a more typical Chinese wife. In American Chinatown. This woman is beautifully dressed, probably for some sort of celebration. And the fact that she's out on the street at all suggests that maybe it's New Year's or another time because the women weren't allowed to go out. So, yes, Chinatown was the center of vice in Los Angeles, but it was also a community of decent, hardworking people who had to live there. So, they had a newspaper. This is a picture of the newspaper. They had temples. They had opera houses. They had chamber of commerce. They had schools and all kinds of things that they created for their life. It's a Christian mission in Los Angeles. Notice the missionaries are women. Here's a Chinese medicine shop, and there was quite a famous Chinese medicine doctor in Los Angeles at the time, and he served both white residents and Chinese. There's a picture of a man with his children, and it's probably, again, Chinese New Year sometime. They're dressed up. But there weren't a lot of kids running around Chinatown because there weren't a lot of women. Chinese New Year was a huge celebration in Los Angeles. Tourists would come to Chinatown to celebrate. There were fireworks and music, and people would open their homes, and people could go in, and they would give away cigars and wine and candy, and they would have a parade. And this is a dragon for the dragon dance, and they were pretty magnificent. I hope you read the books. The Woman in the Camphor Trunk is just out from 7th Street Books. The novel stands by itself, but it is the sequel to The Secret Life of Anna Blanc, which tracks Anna's journey from socialite to police matron. Thank you so much.